Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It is about 6 minutes after noon on the East Coast of the United States, October 15th, 2019. But this video is going to apply no matter when you're watching it. So if you're watching it, not live, it's great. And just give me some comments wherever you're watching. And if you are watching live with us, I'm not sure where you're watching it because we're multi-streaming it, but go to our YouTube channel, which is VeganVideos.info. It's the last little line of text here in the title, and you can type me your questions there. I'll get all your messages when they're typed in at VeganVideos.info, and make sure you subscribe while you're there. So you probably see from the title, we want to talk about basically clean water and how clean water is impacted by lifestyle. And this video is really going to be made for just about anybody, regardless of your knowledge on the subject. And I think it may yield to some surprising conclusions, depending upon what you've thought or not thought about, how deeply you've thought about this. Because a lot of the things that I think are going to be discussed here are going to be things that you don't necessarily see a direct correlation to. And I mean, I think anybody can see like trash in the water or someone dumping chemicals directly into the water, and you're going to have some bad water quality, right? Okay, there's Yusef Chakori says hi. Hey, Yusef, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments there. You're on Facebook, I can see that. I don't know where your physical location is or what group or page you're in. Actually, you've got to be on a page because groups will not give me comments. So if you're watching this live and you're in a Facebook group, definitely go to VeganVideos.info and type your comments there. Okay, well, let's talk about water quality and lifestyle impact on water quality. It's fairly complicated, so we're going to start in a really basic idea, which is that most of the water quality issues that we have in different places around the earth are the direct result of activities happening on the land that eventually, either quickly or slowly, filter their way down into our water supply. So if it's something that's going to take a long time, it may be at a higher elevation away from oceans. This water may have to filter its way through stormwater runoff, and that's a common theme here. Stormwater runoff, you have to understand that. Stormwater runoff will basically wash anything off the land into any kind of, human engineered drainage system or stormwater management system, then into streams and creeks and rivers, and ultimately into lakes and oceans. Okay, so everything ends up in the oceans. The ocean is just one giant dumping ground for everything that you do on the land. So if you're at a higher elevation, these things take a much longer period of time to get down to the water, and you may not draw a correlation there. You may think, oh well, somewhere during the process, this stuff's just going to be taken care of on its own, and it's not going to really go into polluting the deep oceans. But that's just not true. Now, if you live at lower elevations, very close to sea level and very close to oceans, what happens with things that are put on the land have a much more immediate and direct impact and direct and immediate consequences, as opposed to folks who live further away from these large bodies of water and at higher elevations. So like we do a lot of work in Florida, and people in Florida have two things going against them because they are at low elevations like we just talked about. So their effects of what happens with lifestyle in Florida are going to be reflected almost immediately in the local waters. But also, along with being close to the large bodies of water, another factor that comes into play here in Florida is the way it was developed. Because, you know, any kind of land that's developed now in most places is going to be subject to a lot of civil engineering requirements in terms of stormwater runoff, containment, filtering, and slowing down of the waters before it actually makes its way into the natural waterways, the streams, the creeks, the rivers. Because if it's not slowed down and if it's not cleaned or filtered somehow, it's just going to be dumping all that dirty water directly in and speeding up erosion processes and transferring all these pollutants. But in Florida, much of the development took place a long time ago by people who were really I mean, Florida a long time ago, if you go back into the history of Florida, was just like the dream. And there weren't a lot of people that lived there. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that air conditioning hadn't been either invented or widely adopted, and it was fairly expensive. But people just went in and took, I'd say, like basically wetland areas that probably would not be allowed to be developed today, and developed it into buildable lots by dredging the land and creating buildable lots in a way that probably would not be allowed today. But that's how the majority, probably, of development in Florida been um, has been done. So that's already in a highly sensitive environmental area if it wouldn't be able to be developed today, but people are living there now. But the other problem is that there weren't really any civil engineering requirements and stormwater management requirements. So, and even if there were, I don't know exactly how effective those could be because they're so close to the large bodies of water. You generally need elevation and you need space and land separating from where the developed areas are and ultimately where the water goes. Things like stormwater management ponds, retention ponds, things like that, they will slow down and filter the water. They are there are hardly any of these in the state of Florida. Most of the development took place before these requirements were put in place. So it's just like a worst case scenario in Florida and a lot of areas. Like anywhere near the beach, you probably notice that a lot of times after a heavy rainstorm, the beaches will be closed. Now if you think about it initially, it doesn't make any sense. Why, if all this natural rainfall just occurred, why isn't the water cleaner than ever? Well, the problem is that all the water that gets dumped down by these storms, it carries everything off the land that humans have placed there, and it quickly and immediately carries it into the water right nearby, which is the ocean, right into the water that is actually along the beaches, because that's where these stormwater openings dump their water. So you've got all this highly polluted water that's collected all of the impurities from the surface of the land that humans have put there, and they've basically all been dumped straight into the shoreline during and immediately following a rainstorm. So it's some of the most polluted water you can imagine, and that's why a lot of these beaches get closed. That's one of the reasons anyway. We're going to get into some other reasons. So let's talk about the concept of veganism. Since we discuss veganism here, our organization, a plantbaseddiet.org, is a completely vegan organization. We subscribe to vegan principles, and we recognize the benefits for people, animals, and our planet. And in this case, we're talking about our planet. We're talking about the environment. So, what's the big deal about veganism? And again, this is a very basic video. Well, I'd say that most people that are enlightened or I'd say, consider themselves awakened in some way, conscious. Let me see. I've got some notes here. I want to see what else I put in my notes that can, because these are things you have to think about. If you just move along with all of society, you may never think about any of these concepts. But the reason why I'm making this video is to get you to think about these things. Yeah, mindful, conscious, awakened, that kind of thing. Well, if you ever saw like the documentary, The Big Breakthrough is Cowspiracy, it talks about how through their calculations they determined that more than 50% of greenhouse gases are the direct result of animal agriculture. Now, how is that? What formula did they use to figure that out? Because if you're just thinking in your own mind and you haven't really examined your lifestyle and you haven't examined society and the way things are set up, you may think, oh, well, don't they just graze all these animals on natural grasslands and separate them out so they have lots of room and everything just kind of takes care of itself, kind of like the idea of regenerative farming, which you may be familiar with. And if you're familiar with regenerative farming, let me know, because that's something that I'm really interested in, and I'm sure that I'll be doing some more information on and videos on that. But that's not the way it works generally. And if animal agriculture did work that way, where we only use naturally occurring native grasslands to graze these animals and let them have all the space that they generally would want and require, there's no way that we'd even come close to providing enough food for people to survive here on planet Earth. there's no way. It's just such an inefficient process. Even if it's done with a regenerative aspect to it, you can't do it at scale without without tremendous amounts of people going hungry. All right, so that's just not practical. So then we've got the CAFO system, or contained animal farming operations, contained in some way, or they're just animals are raised at animal farms in setups that are designed to create profit, or at least as much profit as possible for the farm owner. And in almost all those cases where you've got those farming operations, which is the vast majority of farming operations, those farms used to be native lands, and in most cases they would have been forests. Okay, uh, and those forests were cut down in order to set up these animal farming operations. So when you take all of the energy that is required to cut all these things down, and then you combine it with a very confined, because it's much more confined than some animals grazing on natural lands, you create a tremendous amount of waste equivalent to that of large cities, okay, that humans live in. When I say waste, I mean, well, cow farts is one of them, but poop and pee and everything else, they're not using the toilet like humans do. They're just scattering it all over the place. So what happens, like we talked about, what happens to create dirty water, water that's not clean in our society? It's generally activities that are managed by humans on the land that end up running into the water supply. So all this poop and pee is going to just run in, this very unnaturally occurring, run into the water supplies. And like I said, it's going to be like large cities. Now, let's not think that large cities are immune, or human ways of managing waste are immune from problems, because we don't want to be that foolish, because we know that there are certainly problems, but at least there are very effective ways of corralling humans into toilets, right? And processing the waste as efficiently as possible, whether that be a septic system, if you're not connected to a municipal system. And yes, we know those have problems. Sometimes if they're designed improperly and they weren't permitted properly, or if they've reached the end of their useful life, and that is a separate issue. Although that is something that is going to always be an issue. I think any kind of septic system needs to be properly designed and properly maintained. Same thing goes for your municipal systems of waste collection for humans. Anything that goes down the drain there is going to be processed. And what usually happens after they process this liquefied waste, because the stuff in the septic systems is liquefied waste. Also, the stuff in the municipal systems is liquefied waste. Well, they put it through processing plants. Some of them are really high tech. Some of them do a great job. Some of them not so great job. And hopefully the people that are overseeing these things are doing a good job and making sure that they are functioning properly. But sometimes they're not functioning properly. Sometimes there's poor oversight. Other times there are spills. Okay, and I know that you guys have heard about this kind of stuff in the news. It does happen. It happens on a regular basis. So don't think that just connecting everyone to a municipal system is going to be solving problems, because when there's a spill in a municipal system, it is a huge disaster as compared to one person's septic system going bad, if you can think about it that way. It's not good, and it's not a cure-all, that's for sure. Not even close. Now let's go back to the concept of veganism. There are a lot of people that believe that you can't truly be an environmentalist or call yourself an environmentalist unless you are actually living a vegan lifestyle. Okay, and the reason why is because a vegan lifestyle does, as much as practically possible, reduce or eliminate the use of animal products in someone's life. It's not necessarily a diet, not in a strict definition. It's an entire lifestyle, meaning you wouldn't buy a car with leather seats, you wouldn't buy leather couches, you wouldn't wear leather shoes or belts. You wouldn't use any kind of animal products. If they use horse guts and glue or whatever that might be, that's not vegan. Honey's not vegan. All these types of things. This has nothing to do with your health necessarily. It's just a lifestyle, and we're not talking about health in this video. We'll talk about that more in other videos, and we have. But the vegan lifestyle is important because you're eliminating the use of animals in an agricultural purpose, the raising and breeding of animals specifically for human consumption. You're eliminating that from the equation. And as we talked about earlier, we know, well, the folks at Cowspiracy know, and others have been able to show mathematically that the animal agricultural operations cause more, more gases, more harmful toxic gases to be released than any other form of pollution, currently happening. So, you know, now we're not talking about gases necessarily, greenhouse gases, although that's a major problem. We're talking about water pollution. And a lot of times with these animal farming operations, they are very efficient. People will say, yeah, we use every single part of the animal, and they do. But they also use lands, just like we said how Florida developed in a time where swamplands or wetlands were converted into buildable lots, and the level of the ground was raised artificially to create these. And like I said, so many, probably half of Floridians live in these places that would never have been or allowed to be developed anymore. Well, animal agriculture also uses a lot of lands that are not suitable for anything else. And the problem with that is also they're fragile environmentally because they're lowlands, there's land subject to flooding. You wouldn't want to build a house there and have your house get flooded, drive your car in there, have your car get flooded. You wouldn't want to use it for any day in, day out activities because generally they're so many of these lands used for animal agriculture. I mean, it's efficient because they're using land that you couldn't use any other way, which probably should be parkland or swampland, but someone's profiting and they're in this business to make money and they can put animals there. And, when floods come on and the animals die, you don't really have that many people, unfortunately, saying that much about it, although it is a terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy when that happens. It's a terrible tragedy that these animals are, raised in usually poor conditions and killed when they don't want to be killed as well, but that's the subject of another video. In terms of destroying the water quality, though, that's a secondary way in which animal agriculture contributes to problems. Because if you're cutting down the forests, first of all, forests are very efficient, especially if they're occurring naturally and natively. They're a very efficient way to manage the land and to manage rainfall that falls down. They absorb and soak in that rainfall when you've got some really thick, healthy forests that are growing. But then when you cut them down and you're just planting a non-native or non-naturally occurring field for animals to graze in, then it's not as efficient as capturing rainfall. So you've got so much more runoff that takes place. Combine that with the fact that a lot of these animal agriculture operations are located in lands unsuitable for anything else, in floodplains and things, and you've got a pretty big disaster. And that pretty much describes most of our system right now. So when you combine those two factors together, if you really think about it, if you become conscious and aware and awakened, you will recognize that if you really care about trying to keep our water from being destroyed, our water quality, and I think that naturally, if humans were not in this equation, there may be a few issues because it wouldn't be perfect, but most of these issues that we have now are the result of human activity, human managed activities, whether it's humans ourselves or whether it's animal farming. So you really need to be vegan. You need to live a vegan lifestyle if you truly claim to want to do something about protecting the quality of our water. And by being vegan and just being vegan, you're voting with your dollars because you're not paying someone to cut down forests to use for animal grazing. You're not paying someone to have these animals out polluting our lands that were changed over and having those pollutants run into our waterways. So you're helping out dramatically if you're vegan. So that is so very important. However, just being vegan doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing all you can or most of what you can for the environment, because there are more components to this. Because like we discussed earlier in this video, any kind of human managed activity that's occurring on the lands is going to eventually make its way into the waterways. So in addition to living a vegan lifestyle, truly, another major help here is that you would be living an organic lifestyle. All right. Now, we're going to talk about this in a very basic manner. What what are the components of an organic lifestyle? Because maybe many of you don't know. Well, basically, it's just a lifestyle that seeks to uh, to be as natural as possible, and typically, and in most cases, be chemical free, because chemicals are wonderful. Okay, I think that in many emergency situations, and I'll just leave it at that because I'm not a proponent of continual ongoing chemical use. But in emergency situations, these technologies are wonderful. But used as simply a labor saving device ongoing, which is really what the chemical industry has turned into, is a terrible environmental disaster in most cases if these chemicals work their way back into our water supply, which they do. It's only a matter of time because all these chemicals are either applied directly to the land or they are used in manufacturing of all kinds of things, including clothes, for instance. And I'm wearing this shirt today as a bad example because it is not, like, say, for instance, organic cotton, which would be great to use in most clothing. Now, it doesn't have some of the advantages of synthetics, where if you're into athletics, it's not going to shed water like the synthetics do. It's going to actually soak it up. And Alexa's turning on here. I hope she doesn't start talking. Uh, anyway, but the problem with the chemicals and the synthetic fibers is a lot of them are microplastics, and when you wash your clothes, which we all recommend that you do, so that you reuse them and you don't just use a one-time single use, because one-time single use of anything is incredibly wasteful. You know, with the synthetics, you are generally washing microplastics into your washing machine and then dumping them into your water supply or your septic system, or some people use gray water and dump it into the creeks, which is not even legal, I don't think. But either way, it ends up in the oceans, these little microplastics. Okay, so when I talk about organic lifestyle, there are so many components to this, and everything matters. And don't start thinking, well, everything's going to destroy the water, therefore I'm doing nothing. That is a total wrong attitude, and it's not even correct. There are only certain things, just like we did a video on cancer, there are only certain things that cause cancer. Everything doesn't cause cancer. You know, just because somebody in your family got cancer doesn't mean you're going to get cancer. And the same is true with water quality. Everything doesn't cause the water to go bad. And in fact, there are many ways to heal and improve water quality. And like I mentioned before, the concept of regenerative farming or even permaculture, these types of things, these serve to give us what we need as humans and also to heal the environment. So there are many ways to look at it. But let's get back to organic lifestyle. So we're talking about a chemical-free lifestyle. So what does that entail exactly? Yeah, we probably should use natural fibers for our clothes and organic, because just because something's cotton doesn't mean they didn't use all kinds of chemicals on the cotton and synthetic fertilizers in the growing of the cotton, etc., etc. So let's get back to that. What does that mean? Well, if we're talking about plants and organic plants versus inorganic plants, generally an organically grown plant of any kind, can yield the same or better final crops as something that's grown with other methods. But an organically grown plant generally will use an organic compost as fertilizer, as opposed to chemical fertilizers. It will not use chemical herbicides, chemical pesticides, and other chemicals, fungicides. There's all kinds of chemicals that manage a myriad of issues that you can have when growing plants. And don't fall, prey to the, that's a prey. I shouldn't say that necessarily as a vegan example, but don't think that, well, there's all these things that can happen with plants, I'm going to have to spray chemicals on them at some point. No. The problem is that people want to grow these plants in a vacuum, like a monoculture type thing, and when you do, you set these plants up for all these issues that are going to require treatment with chemicals. Whereas if you grow them, like we mentioned before, in a regenerative or permaculture type setting, where you're growing other companion plants that will help out or eliminate issues instead of using chemicals, that's what you want to do. Now, is it labor intensive? Yes. Okay. let's talk about the idea of weeding things, for example. Yes, it's very, very labor intensive. Now, I did a video on gluten versus glyphosate too. Glyphosate is the chemical ingredient Roundup. That's a huge, huge labor saving device. Now, how? Let me just talk about it very, very quickly. You can watch that video if you want to learn more. But basically, Roundup is a non-selective herbicide which kills basically everything it touches. It will kill woody plants if you make it concentrated enough. And so generally you don't want to touch anything if you're just spraying it around your garden, anything that's beneficial that you want to keep because it'll kill it. But if you use genetically engineered crops, they will take the Roundup, they will soak it in, that's how it works. It gets sucked into the plant. And instead of being killed off by the Roundup, it will have no effect on the life of the plant. Now it will have, I'm sure it will have some effect on the actual plant itself because it's going to have those chemicals in it. And I know the companies who produce it don't want to talk about that. And yeah, they'll say it's broken down and all this other stuff, but sorry, I think there's some negative side effects. That's part of the problem with chemicals. There's always negative side effects, always. They have no one's produced a chemical that I know of with zero negative side effects. So anyway, instead of weeding the fields, you just spray the whole field, everything, with glyphosate Roundup, and it kills off everything except for the one plant you want to keep. So there's none of this growing companion plants or anything. They'd all be killed off too. This is how it works. It's a labor-saving device. So chemicals are a labor-saving device, and what does it mean to the end consumer? It means you're going to pay less for your products. You are. So if you're going to buy some organic stuff, you're always going to pay more at the store because all the hidden costs of non-organic products, which is environmental destruction, are not paid for by anyone in the current system that we have. So much of this, just like how animal agriculture destroys the environment, the hidden costs of animal agriculture are not paid for by you, the consumer, when you're buying. So you may say, gosh, Mike, everything you're telling me to do costs more. And yeah, it is going to cost more, at least for now. But there are some technologies on the horizon that I believe are going to change the game, really, as far as this is concerned. Because if we talked about Roundup and glyphosate as a labor-saving device where you don't have to weed fields, well, what could we possibly do that's a non-chemical way to weed fields? Well, we could make robots, artificial intelligence, some kind of things that's going to go up and down the fields at super fast speeds, electrically powered, and it's going to pull off all these weeds intelligently so that we don't need to use any chemicals. And these things are already under development. This is not some kind of science fiction. To me, that's going to be the next level of farming, is to do that. So that'll be a great, great time when people don't have to use that, and we can enjoy some cost savings. So maybe the difference in price between organic food and non-organic food either won't be so much, or maybe it'll be less, because maybe the government will start taxing these chemical companies for all the environmental destruction that these chemicals are eventually causing to our water supply. They are. It's just like we talked about. Everything runs off. Everything works its way into the water. Okay, so that's why it's important for an organic lifestyle to eat organic food. So if you're not, don't. This video is kind of debunking things here, where you can just go ahead and point the finger at one certain individual and not point it at yourself, because as I just pointed out, there are many different things that you could probably do as an individual, and me too, where you're always going to be improving. Don't think that you already know all this stuff, because you don't. If you did, you'd be perfect, and you'd probably be able to convince just about everybody else to do it. But we're not in that situation right now. Society is pretty messed up in terms of the way this is right now. It's not a priority. Just as most things in the United States, it seems like the bottom dollar rules everything. Most people, especially in the United States of America, are driven by low cost. So until new technologies come along that are going to ultimately cut the cost, it's still going to be a little boutique thing, organics, and we don't want it to be. Just like electric cars, we don't want that to be a boutique thing either. Oh, and why? Let's talk about organic lifestyle. Well, electric cars aren't necessarily organic, but they don't pollute, they don't have tailpipes, and they don't have internal combustion engines, which, as we all know, generally leak oil over a period of time. They're very, very complicated machines that require constant lubrication, constant changing of oils. That stuff works its way into the water supply. That stuff, when it drips on the pavement as you're driving by, you ever notice when you're driving down a road, the center is dark? the center of the road and it's lighter on the edges, it's because everyone's oil is dripping from their engine into the road there. You go to the parking lot, you see where everyone parks. Up in the top third of that parking spot, generally where the engine rests, you'll find big oil spots in almost every parking lot. Those cars are leaking oil. This is another way of an organic lifestyle. If you're considering an organic lifestyle, if you care about our water quality, you want to move away from internal combustion engines. They have yet to develop and may never develop a system where they will not leak oil over time. So the best thing you can do is move away from them. And this is from a water quality perspective. There are many other reasons to move towards electric vehicles and away from internal combustion engines. We're not going to get into those here, but I'm just talking about from an organic lifestyle perspective. Not having to use any kind of fossil fuels is great because the fuels leak as well. And when you drip a few drops from your, filling in your nozzle at the gas station and it drips on the pavement, where does it end up? Well, a lot of it does evaporate, but there's still some remnants of that. And when you get a heavy rain, where does it end up? It ends up in the storm drains, ends up in the creeks, rivers, oceans, everything else. So all the stuff ends up in the oceans. And, we had Captain Paul Watson from Sea Shepherd at Mountain Veg Fest, which is one of our events, and that's what he talked about too. And I know he's very, very concerned that we may have already reached a tipping point where we may not be able to come back from all the destruction that we've caused. And so much of it we don't see because we don't really spend much time. Most of us don't spend much time in the oceans, in the ocean environment, so we don't really see what's going on. So much of this happens, just without us seeing it. And all we see is the convenient lifestyle. So we just need to think about this more. Okay, that's what we need to do is think about it. Now let's get into some more things about organic lifestyle that are not just chemicals or not just chemicals for the sake of saving labor, but how about chemical fertilizers and nitrogen loads? Because this is what's been really making the news in a lot of different areas recently, is the fact that the nitrogen loads of the stormwater runoff are so heavy in so many places nowadays that they are causing algae blooms and growths of all kinds of things that are unprecedented in our waterways. Specifically, more of our still waterways, which is our lakes and maybe oceans. They don't run as fast as some fast-running creeks and streams and rivers and things like that. But even in some of the rivers, we're seeing this now too, because the nitrogen loads are becoming so high, they're so unnaturally high. And like we mentioned earlier, it's not to say that this wouldn't take place on its own without humans mismanaging everything, which we are, and for the most part. These things would probably still occur from time to time, but nowhere near like they're occurring now. No, nowhere near. Red tide, algae blooms. What happens when you have this red tide and it's algae blooms? Well, it's disgusting. It removes the oxygen from the water, so fish die. Fish die because they're being poisoned by this as well. It's too high of a just any kind of impurities in the water, including other chemicals as well. And of course, these algae blooms, these red tides and things, they release toxins into the environment that many humans are very sensitive to. So it's causing all kinds of health problems for people living near the water, and they just kind of go in and out. Depends on the temperature, depends on the amount of runoff we've had, because rainstorms, natural rainfall does cause this stuff to build up. And sometimes when you go through a period of drought, you may say, hey, well, we don't have these problems anymore. Well, it's probably because you're in an area right now that's below normal rainfall, so you're not seeing it. It's just being pent up, and then the minute you get some more heavy rains, it's going to happen all over again. So you got to live, like we talked about earlier, you got to be conscious about your thoughts, about your lifestyle, and about that everything's connected, and that anything that you do that is in violation, I'd say, of a vegan lifestyle and an organic lifestyle is going to pollute the water. All right? It is. The only question is how much and how quickly. And don't say that you are not part of this, because you are, and I am too, as I mentioned. What we've got to do is keep learning. We got to keep learning, become more conscious, learn about what these things are, and just decide that we're not going to do this anymore. And now, maybe you are, and like we talked about, a lot of this is a cost savings measure, and we haven't reached a technology tipping point yet to where the cost of doing the right thing is less, and maybe you never reach that. Maybe we have to tax the hell out of bad behavior, like we have with cigarettes and other things that do really nothing but harm to humans and the environment. But in the meantime, if you really and truly don't have enough money to survive, of course, don't go into debt, don't go into bankruptcy just to try to improve the water quality. Although if you do, You know, if you know anybody like that, get them in touch with me. I'd love to interview someone like that, okay? Because that is a really noble cause. But when you have more money, you've got to do better, okay? Just like I mentioned here, there's so many different facets to this, and if you're not doing them and you are comfortable financially, I challenge you to go out and start doing some of these things today and make it a habit. And I know that with anything that you do, that's a change of habit. It's very difficult, and it's a period of time. It's a process to change that habit. So keep coming back, comment on this video, share this video, watch it again. I probably need to sit there and watch my own self talking, in another few months to remind myself of all the things that I'm not yet doing to the best of my ability that I probably should be working on. All right, now okay, let's get to the nitrogen loads. So what are the nitrogen loads causing that you've been hearing about in the news? We talked about red tide and algae, and what are the results of that? Okay, fish dying, tourism, especially near coastal areas, falling off, real estate property values, coastal property values plummeting, although they probably will if the water levels are going to rise like everyone says they are. They're probably going to plummet anyway, so I would get out of there. That's just my own personal opinion. Stay away from the very edge of of large bodies of water like oceans. But also deaths of pets. I've been hearing about that recently. If you have been hearing about that, let me know. Post some articles too, because, excuse me, I've been hearing about deaths of pets all up and down the east coast of the United States. I mean, yeah, more of it happens when these big algae blooms happen, and generally the larger the body of water, the more land that drains into it, such as the Mississippi. Down in New Orleans, there's this huge dead zone. It's been there forever because you've got this huge nitrogen load from all these Midwest farms of all kinds. And when I say farms, I'm talking about animal agriculture, right? Because even the poop from the animals is a huge nitrogen load, in addition to just outright polluting the water. But any of the non-organic farming, and most of the non-organic farming that takes place, believe it or not, goes to feed these animals. These animals don't eat meat to survive. They eat plants. All right, so cut out the middleman. Get some good organic plants for you to eat, rather than eating these animal products, which were raised on mostly non-organic monocropped plants that have helped to destroy our water quality. All right, now, but pets, like pets, you hear about going into shallow waterways, just kind of playing in the ocean or playing in creeks and rivers, playing in lakes, end up dead, incredibly sick or dead. And I'm talking about from the algae loads, the nitrogen loads, like this green algae. Just because you see green algae, I mean, a lot of that is natural, but I think a lot more of it occurs now because of all the runoff we've created. We keep developing more and more land, and of course, cigarette butts are an issue too. That's probably one of the biggest polluters out there. But of course, you shouldn't be smoking anyway. Okay, smoking ruins the air quality, and yeah, if you dump your cigarettes in the water, it's going to ruin the water quality too. So it's just bad all around. But there are so many different factors to this. But that's how we've been seeing it recently. I think that this kind of goes in waves, and we had a wave there for a while where it seemed like there were quite a few pets that were dying because they went into just natural waterways and were killed by these growths that were in the water that were fueled by high nitrogen loads and probably other, potentially other chemicals. But I think it could be as simple as just as high nitrogen loads, and they've done a number on things. So let's go back to other sources of this runoff, because there's yet another source that we haven't talked about yet, and that is just general land development, especially suburban land development. Now, urban is a little bit different, but rural and suburban land development, you think about it. When you develop a property into a dwelling unit, what does everyone want to see? They want to see a lawn, right? And some kind of nice looking landscaping. Now, in some communities that are even new, I have seen it recently, they have made it a point to plant native landscapes, and that's commendable. If those, that's a step in the right direction, but I have yet to see a native landscape area that is not organically managed. That's the other thing. Just like the crops, you've got to organically manage your landscapes as well. But that's a very, very small portion of the development that's going on right now. Most of it is still the traditional American lawn. Everybody wants their lawn and their landscape. They want it all to look the same. They have this idea in their head, and in almost every case, none of that stuff is native. None of it would survive on its own. You can't just throw a lawn in and a landscape with beds and plants and expect them to look anywhere near decent without an incredible amount of maintenance. I mean, in most places, especially along the east coast of the United States, if the landscapes were left to be native, they would be forests, because that is the least uh, maintenance intensive. It's native, it's naturally occurring. It requires the least amount of any kind of effort once it's established, and it's very, very water friendly too. Like we talked about earlier, it doesn't allow all this runoff to occur, and all this runoff really puts under a microscope all of our activities as it destroys the water quality by picking up everything that we've left behind. So some of you may know I actually have a landscape business, okay? And so this is something that you know, and I'll tell you, my thoughts on all this have changed over time, the landscape stuff. Because yes, native landscapes are important. Yes, in most cases, a lawn in front of a detached house is the wrong way to go. All right? And because of that, I have, I'd say I've changed the way I run my business. I don't really want to get involved with clients anymore that have this postcard picture perfect idea in their head of how everything needs to look perfect. And that usually involves a tremendous amount of maintenance that is needless, by the way. All the work and hours of maintaining a property like that can be way better used retraining these folks to do other things, okay? Because that is just totally pointless, other than just exterior cosmetic beauty in someone's mind. But it's not exterior cosmetic beauty in the natural sense. I mean, it looks more like Disney World. You guys have been to Walt Disney World. That's all manufactured landscapes. And now maybe they have some native areas. If they do, comment below, and I'd love to check those out if that's the case. But it's all just the same stuff, and it's the whole attitude of us thinking that is the way to go is just brainwashing the next generation into wanting the same thing, and this destruction of our water quality just going on, and it will reach higher and higher levels that we may not ever be able to be reversed. Like I was saying, Captain Paul Watson of Sea Shepherd is concerned that we may already have reached that point, but we don't know. And I do believe that there are many forms, like we said, of regenerative agriculture, permaculture, that can heal the environment. Hopefully, one of the reasons why I'm doing this video is to get the word out. If please watch this again, watch it many times, tag your friends in the comments, let me know of any questions you have here while I'm making this video, if you can. And even if you're not watching live, just share it. It's out there. It'll be out there. But the residential, the commercial American landscape, the idea of that is wrong on so many levels, and it is highly, highly destructive to water quality. And even if it's being done organically, if it's not a native landscape, I seriously question whether that is good for water quality, because of the fact that it is not the optimal conditions for containing and managing stormwater runoff. All right, and as we talked about it earlier in this video, those systems were neglected for a long time during the course of humans developing property, and going back to retrofit is either going to be enormously expensive or impossible. So just let trees grow. Just turn everyone's front and backyards into forests in the east coast of the United States, if those are native where you are. Now, if you're watching somewhere else in the globe or some other part of the United States where forests are not native, comment. Let me know what is the native landscape in the area that you are. And I'm curious, are people putting in lawns and regular American-looking landscapes there? Because it seems like no matter where people go, that's what everyone wants, even if they live in a desert, right? They want to turn that into a lawn with trees and shrubs that would never grow there on their own. So we want to try to avoid that. There's a reason why there's native plants there. And this is another big component. So far we've talked about three big components to lifestyle and water quality. We talked about the concept of veganism and a vegan lifestyle. We've talked about the concept of organic, and that applies to not only growing plants, growing crops, but also to managing landscapes. And then a little bit of a sub category there in landscapes is that these landscapes should be native, because they're going to manage the stormwater runoff so much better than any other landscape that you could put in, unless someone develops some new technology. I mean, I'm not saying that we're not going to find out some incredible way to manage this stuff in the near future, and that seems to be the way technology does develop, right? You reach this critical point where we have to do something, and all of a sudden someone develops some new technology, and it's a great thing, and that may be the case here. Now, I do believe, for instance, one one example of that, two examples, the robots that do weeding so that you can get rid of chemicals as a labor-saving device is a great way that technology is kind of catching up. And then electric vehicles is another way, because you're not carrying around these oil dripping machines. You're not driving around these oil dripping machines that are just dripping oil everywhere they go, and you're spilling gas. And of course, all the stuff with refining and moving gasoline around is way has way more potential for leaking anything anywhere than just transmitting electricity from one location to the next. All right, so these things are all really important, and I'd like to see if I forgot something, because I took a lot of notes for this talk, because it is fairly complicated. All right, okay, let's talk about something else in terms of water quality, right? And we talked about it with Captain Paul Watson of Sea Shepherd. Just the whole idea of fishing. All right. Now, there are a lot of people, when you talk about fishing, they say, "Oh, there's two different things. There's sport fishing, right, where you're catching one or two fish here and there, and then there's commercial fishing." Now, I think we all know that commercial fishing is horrific for the environment. These fish are part of the balancing of nature in our oceans. And if you're farming them and you're buying that, don't buy that either, because they're full of chemicals. They don't use organic methods that I'm aware of for farming fish. It's really bad and destructive for both humans and the environment. But in terms of the naturally occurring oceans, the technologies have improved to such a level now, from what I'm told, that it is so easy to catch fish. It's not the challenge that it used to be. And I mean to catch them on a large scale. And of course, there's always bycatch. You're always catching all these things that you don't want to catch at the same time. That's always going to be the case. But you're catching enormous amounts of fish, to the point where the fish and the oceans cannot breed on their own enough and replenish the life supply of the fish on their own to be able to remain in balance, which means that we'll have fishless oceans in the near future. So I am not in any way advocating, because I did talk about the vegan lifestyle, that we should clean up our water so that you can go out and fish. Okay, and I don't mean just on a commercial scale. I'm talking about on a sport fishing scale as well, because just the whole idea that you're going out there and you're dedicating all this energy and time to torturing some some individual animal that doesn't want you to do this is probably a bad idea. And if you add up all the sport fishermen together, they are going to make a huge negative impact on the environment and water quality. And yeah, I mean, I guess if fish disappear from the ocean, sport fishing is going to be even more challenging in the near future. But that's not really something we should be spending our time on. Not to mention, almost all the boats are run, that I can see, by internal combustion engines, which leak their oil and their gasoline directly into our water instead of putting it onto the pavement and having it wash in. And that's just not a good thing. And not to mention, those propellers are constantly stirring stuff up. They're killing manatees in Florida. They're killing all kinds of things just by the act of their propeller spinning. And if they use these jet things, I guess they're sucking fish into their jets, and they're doing all that stuff too. Boat technology is not where it needs to be to not do harm to the waterways, unless you're talking about maybe a sailboat or something like that. Okay, but those things, this a little side note there, that fishing should not be considered one of the benefits of increased better water quality. And now another thing that I want to mention that is specific to Florida, because we haven't really talked about that, specifically southern Florida, is the way that the entire landmass has been engineered down there. Because not only did they fail to engineer stormwater management ponds in the development that took place, most of the development that took place up to this point in time, they also re-engineered massive parts of the land south of Lake Okeechobee so that more and more of that land could be developed. And they did that by, instead of allowing the historic flow of the lake, which, and lake water is dirty water, because even in a natural scale, it's collecting all the water from rivers and streams, and it's kind of filtering it out. It's kind of like a stormwater management pond does, where it slowly filters it out over time, and impurities sink down to the bottom, and really the clear water as it overflows is cleaner, and that flows into the rest of the surface, and protects it from doing more destruction. However, they've created large dikes or dams around Lake Okeechobee, and they literally open up floodgates and release non-purified lake water, which is already destroyed by ourselves, through our human activities that we talked about earlier, from north of Florida, North Florida, like Orlando and below, all the stuff that happens between there and Lake Okeechobee. So it's not clean water, and it's let out along with all its fertilizer loads, and that really shocks the St. Lucie and the the Caloosahatchee rivers, and creates even more problems with red tide and algae blooms. So that re-engineering of taking a lake which serves a natural purpose of filtering and engineering it to open up unpurified and highly nitrogen-laden waters into areas that would not get it causes problems of its own. Another problem with that is the non-organic practices of non-beneficial plant growing. Okay, now I'm going to lump a few things into non-beneficial plant growing. I'm going to say refined sugar is a non-beneficial plant, and things like palm oil and other things, because are non-beneficial. Any kind of oil form of anything is non-beneficial, but they're also, I say most refined sugar and most all oils need not be farmed in the way that they're farmed, and they do cause plenty of environmental destruction, and most of them are done in using non-organic. I understand non-organic methods, and they back pump their water into Lake Okeechobee. They're non-organically grown sugar water. So don't think this is a bad thing for plant eating. Just think it's a bad thing for plants that serve no beneficial purpose to humans, and refined sugar is one of them. There's no beneficial purpose other than a momentary slap to your taste buds. There are other ways to get sweetened things: maple syrup, dates. There are other forms, more whole food based, non-refined, organically grown methods of sweetening your foods. And like I said, oil doesn't really serve any purpose in terms of human health. In fact, it actually degrades human health. So I know that palm oil, the way it's grown, like I said, is very destructive to the environment as well. And anything that's destructive to the environment ultimately damages our water quality, which is the subject of this video. So all these things kind of lead together into really taking care of your health, because if you take care of your health as a human, you're going to eliminate these things as part of the equation. You're going to eliminate refined sugars, hopefully, right? And then you're going to eliminate oils from your diet. So let's see, I'm trying to go through my list, make sure I have talked about everything. I think, yeah, processed sugar, traditional non-native landscapes. I think that's about it. I think we've covered almost everything in terms of lifestyle, your own personal lifestyle choices, and water quality. And hopefully from watching this video, and comment below, maybe you've been able to pinpoint a few areas in your own lifestyle and your own choices that you make on a daily basis that you want to try to improve or make better. And if you have, go ahead, go in the comments there and let me know what those are. I'd love to hear what those lifestyle choices are. And as I mentioned too, I feel that, at least as far as my own self is concerned, that I'm constantly learning about new concepts in regards to human health, the environment, and protection of animals. And all these things are ultimately, most of these things actually, are going to be benefiting the water quality in a positive way. So I'm always learning, and any other concepts that I have not talked about that you guys know about here, please write in the comments, and then I will gladly investigate them, and I'll do maybe another video on those concepts as well. But in the meantime, I think we all have a lot of work to do. And I challenge yourself to not point the finger at someone else. I challenge yourself to not assume that someone else is going to do this, all right? And I challenge you to set the right example so that others might see you living in a certain way where you make it clear to people that water quality is important to you. And this is especially true right now, that I feel like we're in a little bit of a lull where there's no alarm being sounded right now for poor water quality, especially in Florida, which is ground zero for these algae blooms and red tide and fish kills and everything else. That's just not happening. I think part of that in Florida is because the hurricane season has been very mild. There's not a lot of big giant storms coming in, dumping water, and then running everything off into our waterways. But that's going to change. So now's the time when we're not sounding the alarm, when you can actually do something so that next time the alarm gets sounded and people hear it and people are giving you their attention, you can tell them what you're doing. You can show them what you're doing. Best to show. If people start asking you questions like, why are you doing this? Well, that's because I know that this negative, something, the alternative negatively impacts our water quality, and this is something that's important to me, and I want to see it improve over time. And like we talked about in this video, technology is a big, big factor in this. Technology has the ability to solve all this, but beware. One thing to be concerned about is a lot of people consider chemicals technology, and like I said, I view chemicals, outside of an emergency situation, emergency use, not to be used on a continual and ongoing basis. Chemical-free lifestyle is the best. Deal with issues at the source. Chemicals don't deal with issues at the source. They are just band-aids and labor-saving devices at best. All right? They do not deal, if they're out there to solve an issue, they do not deal with the issue at the source. The point of this video is to tell you what the sources of this poor water quality and water pollution are, so that we can hopefully deal with these things at the source. And if you want to see any of our live events, please go to VeganVideos.info or PlantBasedEvents.info. That's our schedule. We have a lot of live events coming up. If you're watching this in October, our next event is November 3rd, Wake Forest, North Carolina. 117-acre Joyner Park. We're going to be outdoors. We're going to have a great event there. Go to wakeforestvegfest.org. Even if you missed it and watching this video later, we're going to have it as an annual event. So just kind of keep that on the radar. But plant-based events, veganevents.info, either one of those will take you to our calendar. And we hope to see you at some of our events. And I look forward to reading your comments here. And if I can, my mouse has stopped working. I'm going to have to stop this in a second. Okay. Well, thanks so much for watching, and have a great day. Bye.